get kicked off with the legendary Edwin Moses. I think he needs very little introduction. Everyone knows him as one of the giants in track and field, winning the gold medal at the Olympics in 1976, and obviously going on to have a second gold medal in '84 and a bronze in '88. And not only has he had that kind of success, but he's been so committed to the work that Laureus has done in terms of sports for good. And I think, Edwin, as we start today's conversation and we get into the mindset of really advocating for the youth sports industry and all the incredible work that they're doing in that industry is doing in the community for local organizations, it'd be great just to get your perspective on the importance of sports. And, I can't help but think about Nelson Mandela's famous quote about the power of sports that took place at that Laureus Awards almost 20 years ago now. And I'm curious, when you think about the importance that sports can play in society, what would you reflect on? And why do you think it's such an important sector right now at a time when we're experiencing so many different things?
I don't know if any of the audience has actually seen the video, but you can find it on YouTube under Laureus. Nelson Mandela came to our first event, the World Sports Awards in the year 2000. I had just been nominated as chairman, and he gave a fantastic speech. And I had the pleasure, excuse me, and the honor of standing on stage just a few feet behind me and looking at the audience. And it's about a 4-minute speech. And he talked about the power of sport, and that sport had the power to change the world. It's a wonderful speech, but the look on people's faces and the impact that it had on the people in the audience, which I had the opportunity to look at, people were actually crying because it was so passionate. But it really sealed the mission for Laureus forever. And I was lucky to have the honor to lead the organization for 16 years. But one of the backstories is that when Mr. Mandela was imprisoned on Robbins Island, the only section of the paper that he could read was the sports section, nothing politics, nothing news. He was in total exile and quarantine out there. And but he did read the sport pages, and he was a boxer, so he knew a lot of us athletes and was able to follow us during our times at that period. But he talked about how sport could heal, how powerful sport could be, that it was more important than politics, and that's been the mission of Laureus ever since.
Yeah, it seems like one of the things that I think about is that famous quote about the power of sports to change the world. He talks a lot about one of the best parts about sports is its ability to break down racial barriers. And as a country right now, we're having such an unprecedented conversation, a needed conversation around equity and justice, right, and equality and access. And so, through all the incredible work that Laureus has done, especially with sports-based youth development organizations, I wonder if you could comment about the critical role that youth sports can play as part of the ways of solving so many of the challenges and issues that we have as a society.
It's very important. And there's so much anecdotal information that people automatically default to when it comes to sports and the role of sports and how important it can be. And I've just been very fortunate to be with an organization that really uses sport, I think, in the proper way to help a lot of kids all over the world with a lot of different conditions, from poverty and homelessness. We've dealt with boy soldiers and kids in the favelas in Brazil, HIV, teenage pregnancy, violence, gangs, just about everything. And we find that we've always used sports as an accumulator. It wasn't about training kids to be better football players or training kids to go into equestrian or basketball. It's about developing the character of the youth that we deal with. That's what we do. So we're not a bricks and mortar organization, but we find that sports as an accumulator, we're able to attract and draw in kids that otherwise may not be interested. And we've done it through everything from sailing to equestrian to cricket to football to track and field, all kinds of sports. So it's that power, the power that sports has to attract kids to go have fun and be in a safe place that has been the most important thing for us. It's just remarkably important, and more important than people anecdotally know that it is.
Yeah, one of the things I think about right now is on this call, you've got an audience of folks that run youth sports organizations, including a lot of the sports-based youth development organizations that Laureus done such an amazing job supporting. And right now, these organizations are navigating two things. One, a surge in demand, right? Parents want their kids playing. These communities have been deeply impacted. In a lot of cases, government services and things like that have been impacted. So there's a need for their services and need for sport more than ever before. At the same time, these organizations have been deeply impacted. Over 50% of them may be at risk of shutting their doors because of the impact on their donations, the impact on their programming fees, the costs that are incurred of operating. What would your message be to those leaders, people that are running those organizations, to help make sure that their programs survive and ultimately thrive and respond to kind of this need?
Well, we had an international board meeting just last week, and we've had 2 or 3 of them during the course of this pandemic. And one of the things that we find out is that there are areas in which organizations don't have to spend money right now on programs and projects. So we looked at the revenue streams that are coming in and the revenue streams that are going out on all of our organizations. And there are some areas where the faucet is shut down, rhetorically speaking. So we did an analysis to really look at how much money is being spent and how much money is being saved, and also looking at the safety value, because we want to deal with the kids, but at the same time we have to be very sensitive to the people that are working the projects, and also the fact that accumulating kids at this point in time may not actually be the best thing to do, because if they happen to be infected, then they can take it home to families. So there's a lot of things that have to be worried about, but this is unprecedented times. And most of our organizations that we deal with have done the analysis, and we've been walking them through it and just figuring out how much money is going to be left in reserve, so to speak, to operate in the future, regardless of what's going on. But it is a problem, and no one would have ever expected anything like this to happen. And so we cut right to the chase.
Yeah, and as you share those words, I think you just illustrate the complexity that these organizations are facing. And it's one of the reasons why, when you have government providing support to all kinds of businesses and sectors and everything else, we're trying to mobilize this coalition to make sure that youth sports and the youth sector is really supported, especially because the design of those programs really don't take into account so many dynamics of sports. Speaking of that coalition, which we're here today about, it really represents this first effort to bring together a very fractured sector, very fragmented sector, to make sure that there's the critical support for organizations and for families around participation. What's your sense about how these kinds of efforts will impact and benefit the industry long-term beyond the pandemic, the benefit of coming together? What opportunities does that create?
It can create quite a few opportunities. We found that when we get a disparate set of organizations, as we experienced in the city of New Orleans with our Model Cities projects, none of these projects knew each other. They had some resources that they could share. They began to learn about what other projects and organizations in their area were doing, and found out that there were a lot of things that could be collaborated on. You don't need 6 wheels to put on an automobile. Sometimes it could be a tricycle where you only need 3 wheels, or you could need 2 wheels. So it's not necessary to recreate the wheel and duplicate a lot of the resources and spending that you need to do. So those collaborations can be very, very important. And you also learn that there is a lot of commonality. There's many different common events that you can participate in together.
Yeah, and it's such a good reminder. When we come together, great things happen, better outcomes happen, collaborations happen. We're about to let you go. And when people get on the phone, they're literally calling their congressional representatives. This is democracy in action here for the next half hour. And as they have these conversations, they're literally going to be able to say, I was just talking to Edwin Moses, and I want to explain to you why sports is so important, and why making sure that the federal government is supporting those kinds of organizations that are making sports happen is so critical right now, that they're not being left behind, that 50% of the industry doesn't go over. What would be the message you would encourage them to pass along when they're referencing this conversation and they're referencing the importance of sports? If you had to sum it up, what's the best thing they could be saying to the elected representatives about why sports is so critical right now and why we need Congress to step up?
Well, obviously you have tens of millions of kids in the country that have nothing to do. I've got them in my neighborhood all day and all night. They're out playing basketball right now. They're not going to school, and they need some leadership. Sports is very powerful in that in this environment, so many kids are going through a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, and sometimes they don't know how to get out of that box. So having the ability to do sports and having somewhere to go that is safe and controlled and measured could be very helpful for their mental outlook going forward.
Yeah, and it's such a great point that sports matters. Going back to Nelson Mandela's speech, he wasn't speaking about a pandemic. He was speaking about the giant challenges that we have as a society, but it matters more than ever before. And your point about the mental health and the need for these kids is evident. So thank you, Edwin, for joining us. Thank you for your leadership and what you've done on behalf of this country, and for a reminder and embodiment of the power of sports. So thanks for joining us this morning. And now we're going to get to work, make you proud. There's no gold medals being handed out for calls to congressional representatives, but we'll see how else we can mobilize and incentivize the group. So thanks for being with us today.
All right. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.